everyone, and welcome to Art with Miss Hawkins.
Today, we're going to be learning about light and shade in our images with our focus medium, watercolor or ink. Our artist is Fernando Bryce. He focuses on questioning mass culture, detextualization, and the irony to cultural stereotypes. His emphasis on technical ability and individual subjectivity is expressed in all of his artworks. These effects can be seen by the way he creates slick, hard lines, like a photo around his imagery, as well as a precise detail in everything he does. The objectives for today is to be able to freehand an image or use a stencil to illustrate one of the following.
The studio habits of mind that will be demonstrated in this lesson is engage and persist and express. Hi guys, okay, so we're going to start our demo today, and we are demoing how to use light and shade using water-based materials. The first thing you'll need is 3 sheets of paper. You're going to need some watercolor. Have access to India ink or regular ink. You'll need some water, paint brushes, some tracing paper, and a couple of stencils or reference images, whichever you guys prefer. And last but not least, some non-washable markers or permanent markers. You can have a thick permanent marker, a regular fine tip marker. That way you have different sizes that you guys can use. And lastly, a good sharpened pencil with a good eraser. First, we're going to start off with our image that we want to draw. We'll draw it on our sketch paper, and so all you're really going to do is use your pencil and draw out your image or whatever stencil image you're using. While you guys are starting to draw, remember that we are going to be tracing our images and then transferring them. So use your tracing paper as a rough draft. If you want to change some things and erase, that's perfectly fine. Our goal is to have our pieces nice and presentable when they get on our good paper. As we mentioned earlier, you'll have 3 pieces of paper. One for your tracing and transferring, the second for your expressive engagement or play when you use the ink, and lastly your final product. Remember, this is okay if you guys mess up or if your final piece doesn't look the way that you want it to. I want you to understand that taking your time or coming to some roadblocks is normal, and when you reassess things, it's perfectly fine to have adjustments to your artwork. That way, you as an artist can grow through conflict and also can create your own solutions. Okay, now that we're done with our drawing, we can flip our transfer paper over and we're going to start to transfer onto our new paper. When you're transferring, to apply pressure with your pencil, not too much to tear a hole in it, but enough to transfer the pencil that you used on the front side so it can transfer to the face of your good paper. To get some practice with transferring your image from tracing paper to your good paper, please repeat the same process. With some time being given for all of you to practice transferring your image from tracing paper to good paper, you should now have your image on every sheet of paper for this project. Your next step is to use the markers you have access to and slowly outline your image. The reason why we're taking our time with this is so that our lines can be nice and straight and precise with your image transfer. This helps your composition look very neat. The reason why I told you guys to work out some trials and play with ideas, because even I made a mistake on my transfer paper, so I decided to change my mind and add some clouds to my van, remove my feather, and have the word freedom written correctly on my paper. So this is my trial, and this is the one I'm going to start my steady hand outline to make sure that I understand the flow of it, and then I will do that on my other 2. That way, your image and the lines that you make, you have enough time to complete a circle or finish the end of your line before you start on another. To see, this is what it's starting to look like. As I'm starting to outline, my lines are precise. I'm making sure that the gray lines I use with my pencil are completely covered up by my bolder black line from my pen.
Here we're going to look at how to use our ink when it comes down to our water and ink ratio.
For this process, I have a dropper that are going to be distributed into these little boxes evenly. You can try seeing different ways your ink will look with more or less water. So we're going to put an even amount in every one of them.
So one.
It'll be my darkest dark, my lightest light. Always know that the more water you use when you have any type of ink, it gets diluted and it slowly becomes less opaque. So now we're going to add our water.
3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
For this next step, I'm going to find a soft bristle brush. This right here is my squirrel fur brush, really good for India ink. Or you can use a brush like this that'll have water inside. That way you can decide how much ink you want to use or put down on a piece of paper. Since this one has the most ink, most water, less amount of water, second amount of water. I'll just make a little swatch. My ink is brown, which is okay. When you have India ink, it'll be a little bit darker. The next one we're gonna do is our darkest dark. Whenever you're done using brush, make sure that you always rinse it off with some water so you're able to get off that extra ink and start fresh. We're gonna go to like our middle one, which is a little bit lighter than this one. And then we're gonna clean our brush one more time. If you happen to have a scratched piece of paper once you're cleaning your brush, it's okay to wipe your actual brush on the paper to get the rest of the ink off before you go and start on another box. This should be our lightest light. And so I made me some swatches, and as you can see, it does get a little bit lighter as you go down. Remember, the more water you add, the lighter the ink will become. So here's a good example. I have my pen and I'm going to add some water to it by squeezing it a little bit. And slowly the water should come out and you should see a different gradient of your ink. And so this is what I'm talking about. When using watercolor, the steps will be the same. If your pen is barely wet and you go to apply it to whatever color you want, it would make it more opaque. And if you add more water to a color that you want to use, it'll make it less opaque and more transparent. Try to use one color and just stick with that and create a gradient and see how you like it, and figure out where you can add your darkest shade of green or your darkest shade of blue and your brightest shade of green or your brightest shade of blue. And I'll show you guys real quick how that looks. We're going to use purple. This is our gradient that we have. I want you guys to try and create at least 4 to 5 different gradients, from darkest to light or light to darkest, whether it be in watercolor or ink. The goal of this project is to have you guys explore different ways of how to mix water with your medium. I want you guys to be able to figure out on your own, just by playing around with it, when to add more water and when to add less water. That way you guys can understand how to create the composition you want. As you guys can see, I'm working on my van, and so my first method that I used is just adding water to my darkest tone and working my way up my van so you can start to see the gradation between the darkest part of my van and the brightest part of my van. For the sake of time, we will move forward and look at the finished product. As you can see in the top, my transfer. Underneath that, my sample of using ink and the ink wash. Next to it, the example of me using watercolor, and lastly, watercolor mixed with ink. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time.